This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? Welcome back to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? Today, my guest is Peter Rojas, Assistant Dean of Intercultural Initiatives at Merrimack College. How's it going, Peter?
I'm doing well. How you doing, man?
Doing all right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Peter Rojas is Assistant Dean of Intercultural Initiatives at Merrimack College. Born and raised in Lowell, Massachusetts, he is the proud son of Colombian immigrants, the youngest of three siblings, and the first in his family to be born in the United States. Peter received his undergraduate degree at UMass Lowell and completed his graduate studies at Florida International University. In addition to diversity programming and initiative, his experience have included working with fraternities and sorority life, campus activities, and student conduct. What exactly is Intercultural Initiatives?
So pretty much what I do for my job is really just focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the institution. And that goes from creating events, whether they're social, educational, bringing awareness, talking about different identities and how to understand those identities, right? But also the main goal is really creating an inclusive environment for our students at Merrimack College, but also making sure that we're creating an educational environment too, right? And I like to tell my students all the time, like, whether you like it or not, you're going to work in a diverse setting. So why not take the opportunity to learn now, where you could make those mistakes, and we're there as a safety net to kind of correct you and lead you in the right path as you go off into your careers. So aside from that, I do also help out with other initiatives on campus, working for the president's DEI council, and also working for the civic engagement one. But that's more of like, creating more systematic change within the college in terms of those components too. So, I do a lot of initiatives, and keywords initiative for me, I like to create, and I like to foster and cultivate new things personally and also at the institution.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty awesome that you mentioned that you try to help students cater their identity and understand identity, especially when you start going to the world, into the real world and start working. Sometimes identities really factor in when you're working a new job. It might be the first time working with different genders, different people, different diversities, and that can kind of difficult, especially when you're trying to start on your career. So talking about that, let's talk a little bit about you. And you are the. It seems you are the proud parent, proud son of Colombian immigrants, but you are the first one to be born in the United States. And so, usually, the first one who's American gets a little bit of that. You're the gringo of the family and stuff like that, and you get a little bit of extra push because you didn't have to deal with a lot of that. Sometimes a lot of that other stuff, that like different language stuff like that. So, how did that affect you early on?
No, so I think so my parents from Colombia, they had my two older brothers there in Colombia. They moved to Venezuela, and they made the move to the States, and that was really something my dad wanted to do, right? Big dream, the American dream, but it was really trying to focus on the um, future of my two older brothers, right? Did the move, everything was good. Then they decided to have another kid, luckily me. And really, it kind of set the tone growing up. And I'll be honest with it, for the fact that, and I think I talked to you a little bit about Spanglish, right? And I joke around with people telling that my first language is Spanglish, right? And I think it's really concrete to who I am as an individual, right? I remember going to school and my brothers would talk to me in English. I go home, I talk to my parents in Spanish. So growing up was really just like a mix of the two languages. And to this day, I won't even lie, there's some words I only know in Spanish, I don't know in English, and vice versa, right? But also, being the first one to be born here in my family overall, period, was very an interesting journey, right? So people always crack jokes on me and just like, why you call Peter, right? So my dad's name's Pedro. My mom wanted him to name me after himself, right? But my dad was just like, he's the first one born here. Why don't we just honor him with calling the English version of Pedro, right? So that's why I get Peter. So it's kind of like a shoulder type of thing, like, living the dream, the American dream, and everything like that, for my parents and my brothers and everything. But I think it's been interesting trying to and we talked about like what is my identity, right? Because like you said, you mentioned being gringo and everything like that. Yeah, from my Colombian side of when I anytime I visited Colombia, it's very like you're really white, you're not really like one of us and everything like that. Not to say I don't embrace the roots, right? I do absolutely whatever. But yeah, I mean, I don't have the typical Colombian accent that you would see in the media, right? And not even my parents have that, right? And they're from Medellin. But I think it's also understanding that like different provinces within Colombia don't have the same accent, right? So it's kind of like being those stereotypes at the same time, but also not even like being an American too is just figuring out like, you know, I'm the token friend and you should do this and that. But also even being here in the States is just like I'm too white, I'm not Hispanic enough, or the vice versa. So growing up it was always that struggle of like being in that environment. Who was Peter gonna be that day? And trying to not scorn myself on like you're a failure not being that individual you're supposed to be, right? That those expectations of you should be a typical Colombian or you should be like the American boy and everything like that. So I say growing up was very interesting, and I still go through that today in certain environments that I'm in. But it's something that you learn and you try to find your pinpoints to kind of achieve in the environments that you're in, and trying to understand who you are. But it's always ever changing as you grow up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you're the youngest of all your siblings. Youngest of three. So it's not only are you the youngest, you're the baby. You're also the only American-born baby. For all of that stuff. Was there some sort of lots of times when you're the youngest, you're treated differently, or your older siblings are kind of set to guide you and push you forward, and you're always compared to them, stuff like that. Was there anything like that going on for you throughout your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like when we talk about the American dream, right, and you talk to anyone who's a person of color or just grown up in like that American dream, like you want your child to go to Harvard or the best schools and everything like that. Like my older brother, right, hit it off the bat. He ended up going to Harvard, right? So you can imagine, like, my parents, like, all right, our first son went to Harvard, an immigrant and everything like that. Now a citizen, he went to Harvard. The second one going to Boston University, another prestigious school in the United States, right? So like, my family, my brothers, set the tone about like what the dream is and everything like that. But there's comparison, you know what I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of any sibling rivalry or anything like that. But I think it was just more of a, not only are you doing it for your family, but also you're doing it to live up to a dream. You know what I mean? Like you kind of want to make sure that you fulfill those dreams for your parents and your family, everything like that. Like kind of an added pressure sometimes people put up upon themselves and everything. But overall, I think I did have the support. I know for me, like I did have my own bad decisions or anything
Yep.
like that, for what it is, and like who doesn't make a bad decision. But I think it's sometimes it's living up to those expectations, especially being the firstborn, right? Because that's my mom would always say that to everyone, like, "Oh, for my baby boy, American, everything like that, like live the dream, everything like that." And there's expectations, you know what I mean? Like whether
Yeah.
you want to believe it or not, like there's something you have to follow, right? And you don't want to disappoint anyone along that path.
Yeah, and so it's amazing, especially for immigrants from Colombia to come in and have three kids, three of all which went to college and amassed some great success for themselves. So that's just, I think every immigrant coming into this country, that's their hope and dream for their kids. Hope to eventually get there, whatever. So you ended up going to college, and I see that you went to you graduated from UMass Lowell, but UMass Lowell wasn't the first school you went to. Tell me a
No,
little about
so
that.
yeah, so my first college I went to was UMass Amherst. So I went to, and the joke, I went to the zoo. I like to say that UMass Amherst was the school that gave me my degree about being an individual. Um, I think for me, my struggle with going to a large institution, now that I think about it, was I went to a private high school, small. I was more focused on the intimate, getting to know the professor, smaller classes, and my first class at UMass Amherst was me and 500 other peers, and I was like, oh man, what am I doing here, right? Um, and I kind of lost that love for education. I won't lie. When I was in high school, I was getting straight A's. My GPA was like a 3.67. I mean, I had my few B's here and there, but kind of lost that love for academia, right? And it was just like I felt like it wasn't for me. And I know for me, it was kind of hard to be like, all right, where's this mishap going? Why am I not having that same passion for academics. And I think it was just the fact that like I didn't know what I wanted to do for my life. I was jumping around for majors here and there, and I was very stubborn. I was stubborn, and I kept trying to get my GPA high. And I went from like a what was it like a 3.6 my first semester, and then ended up dropping to a below a 2.0. Where sadly, at the end of the day, I had to. I was on academic probation. I got suspended from the school, and I wasn't able to return for 3 years. I wish I would have probably taken a break, right? Just taking a moment. But I think for me, it was twofold. I didn't want to give up on the dream for my parents and my family, right? But also, I'll have the stereotypical Latino aspect behind me. I was stubborn. I was like, no, I can get through this. Like no, no crying here. We got to get things done, everything like that. But life happened and it didn't pan out that way. But things happen. I think what ended up, which I do appreciate now, was I had an opportunity to go work in the real world, do different jobs like retail. I think the one job I did appreciate was being a vocational coach at a school that catered to students that were on the spectrum. And my goal was to bring them to work in offices and get them acclimated to learn how to work. Right. It was very interesting to see that type of life and to understand different mindsets and how those students think and the perspective people have, especially if they're not educated on those with any types of disabilities or anything like that. um, a lot of them, when you talk to them, we're just like there's nothing, you have your problems, I have my problems. And I think I appreciate and am very grateful for that experience, and it kind of motivated me back to be like, all right, like I shouldn't be stressed out and depressed the fact that I didn't finish work. Yeah, I did, and I did have my mental health issues, but it kind of jumped me back into school. Weirdly enough, I couldn't go back to UMass Amherst because I was working full time. So I had to go to the nearest school, which was UMass Lowell. But I had to go to community college, which I have a new appreciation for community college, to get boost my GPA because UMass Lowell was like, your GPA is terrible. I need you to prove that you can do it. But it was good to just have that experience at community colleges, there to help you out, to get you to that next level. So went to Middlesex first semester, finished UMass Lowell within a year. Luckily, I did well in my minor, so I was able to transfer those credits. And then my mindset was on school, so I went straight to grad school. Decided to get away from the area to get a different perspective in life. So I went to Florida International in Miami. So I always joke around, took my talents down there. But I appreciate that experience too, and I think it brought me to another level as an individual. But also being a Latino, seeing what life is for a Latino down in Florida, right, and what that experience is, because it's different wherever you
Mhm.
live. So I think that was a cool experience too, and living in that environment and in terms of how people treat you there too. But it was good. I do appreciate that experience also.
Yeah, and so, just to kind of rewind a little bit, it's interesting when you talk about, you know, most people when they start their first year in college, they do really bad and they got to work their way up. And you seem to have done really good your first semester, but slowly that started coming down. And then you talk about a little bit about your mental health, kind of being a factor and all that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think, well, I mean, and I think a lot of the times where you know I never really talked about my feelings. I never talked about emotions. I kept everything in. I thought I could do everything on my own.
Which is a
Uh,
very common thing for Latino men. As a young, we always
Absolutely,
told to
right?
suck it up and keep working hard.
Yeah, you suck it up and do it. And I think that I just got that from my brothers. And I think that's just the way I knew life was. Right? I wasn't an individual that'd be like, hey, love you, mom. I love you, dad. I love you, brothers. Like, I'm going to talk to you about my feelings and my problems and vents and everything like that. It was more like, I just got to do what I got to do. And, what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure my mom and dad, they've gone through their struggles and like from, immigrating here, like my dad would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work. My mom would wake up at early, go to work, get me ready for school and everything like that. And I'm over here like I can't do a paper. You know what I mean? Like, so my mindset was just like, what am I doing? But I think overall, just the pressures that were going on just finally got to me. I had my depression, I had my suicidal attempts, and no one knew about it, right? And I was really good at hiding that. And I think that's really sometimes with Latino or the Latino population, we're really good at like hiding our emotions, right, until it blows up where
Hmm.
you can't do that part, right? So a lot of people didn't know I was going through. I know a lot of my close friends up until this day still don't know that I didn't really graduate from UMass Amherst, and sometimes they get shocked and they're like, "Wait, UMass Lowell? What are you talking about?" I never really shared that experience. It's only to like past few years, I've really been more open about it and mental health because it's very important. I think it's seeing friends that have, committed suicide, or just seeing other people that are going through that, having that ear for someone and let them know that there is someone to go to. If I'm a proponent about going to therapy, I go to therapy too, because it helps out. It's good to have someone there to kind of bounce off, that someone's neutral too, because I think a lot of times people don't want to vent to their friends, for their friend are
Mhm.
going to be like, I don't want to hear from your crap again, you know what I mean? Or, there's a burden aspect behind it, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So, um, yeah, I think overall what ended up happening was just like I just lost that passion on the academia side, and my main focus was like I was super involved in college too. So I think my focus just got driven to like being involved on campus and helping the community out, and like my passion was just shifted, but I didn't realize I got to shift my academics also with that passion. So um, sometimes I do think about it and like, do I regret not trying to make a better effort, or, if I would have had better resources, would things would have been different? Yeah, sometimes I think about it, but now like how life has panned out, if it wasn't for those experiences, I would not be where I am today, being an advocate for mental health, being an advocate for even diversity and identity, and cultivating that. So, I mean, you can say I'm a believer in the universe saying, making things happen, but, you know, is really trying to embrace all those things in the past and making them into something better.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on a good point there, where for a lot of us, mental health has never been a priority, and we deal with a lot of things when we come to this country. It's different when you're, yeah, I don't know how different it is, but when you're coming from someplace else and you're raised one way and the rest of the world is slightly different. You deal with things and you internalize a lot of it. That identity crisis affects you regardless of whether or not you believe it or you think you're handling it well. Sometimes it does help, and mental health is usually one of the big ones for our culture that we don't talk about. I mean, we don't look at. We scoff at when we think, sometimes we look at weaknesses when people start saying, oh, I'm feeling depressed, and get depressed, you're not depressed, you don't even know what depression looks like, you don't know what living a hard life is about, you know what I mean? And I tend to do the same thing. I tell people, it's really important to do therapy, and it's really important. I have a lot of friends who are therapists, so I tend to talk to them a lot, and get their feedback on it. One of the brothers too, Renee Garcia, and
Yeah.
it's one thing that our culture really needs to rev up on the importance of it, and it kind of sucks that for a lot of us, we tend to wait until we get to a point where um, we don't realize we need it until way later in our lives, as opposed to starting early. And so, but with that and your things that you've been going through, you talk about your identity crisis. What was the kind of turning point for you that made you decide, hey, I know exactly what I want to go to. I'm starting to figure out who I am and where my what I need to do to move to my path leading forward.
Yeah, I think and it's funny because like, a few moments ago I was talking about like the universe and everything like that, and other things, components adding to like the Latino culture is just like the religion component to it, right? Like I would never dare tell my mom I was depressed, because I knew the automatic response was like, but God will be there for you. You know what I mean? Type of thing. And we're like, and that's even a struggle for a lot of families, especially like a lot of Latinos are on the Catholic faith, where, people don't either believe or don't have the patience to be have that faith and everything like that. And sometimes like, it's hard to believe in something that you don't see, right? And I think that adds to it too, right? But to go off on the question you just asked, I think it came to a moment where where was it, man? I was in Colombia, um, thinking about going back to school, right, to get my bachelor's and everything like that. And I was having that moment, just like, I need to go back, and I needed that sign, right? And I had gone back to Colombia, and I had not been there for years. And I went with my mom and my dad, and that was the first time my dad had been there in like 25 years. So like that was an experience to have. Cool to be there with my dad. I've gone previously with just my mom, but I think it was just a realization of, you know the struggles they've gone through, right, and how they parented us, how they parented me, um but like how they lived their life gave a purpose, right? And I think for me, I came to realize that like my failures and the academia side, but also having my own identity crisis within college, and but I also had this passion of like wanting to give back, and promoting awareness that I knew that I needed to get to a place where I need to be in a environment, a location, maybe higher ed, college, where I can tell students that are probably feeling like me, going through the same struggles, and tell them my story, right? Um, and have them realize that like you're not alone. I think one of the main reasons why I didn't take that break, back at UMass when they told me I should probably take a break was the fact that like, and I don't think until that point at UMass where like I had someone that didn't look like me tell me that I should take a break. I was like, well, what do you really know, right? Like you've never lived my life. Like you know what it is being a Latino and everything like that. And that comes like the whole stubbornness behind that. That I think for me, where I kind of look like some of these students, and I have some similar backgrounds of growing in a city, an urban area, having the public school, but also the private school mentality behind it. That what I'm telling you is a lived experience. I'm not shooting the shit on this part, right? I'm giving you some real life experience that I think, whether you want to take my advice or not, it's coming from a place of good intent. And I think that moment I was just like, that's my purpose. My purpose is to come back and figure out how I can help these students out, figure out how I can not have another Peter out there. You know what I mean? Where they're struggling and everything like that. So I think that was that moment just being, and I think just helped out being going back to the motherland, right, and kind of seeing how they grew up and how they lived, and that kind of really see what they were talking about. And I think it was good that my dad went, right, because I got to see his perspective of it. I've been there several times, like my mom, like I said, but just hearing him and talking about his life there and why he left, right? So I think that's because at the end of the day, he's the one that made the decision. My mom followed him and and brought the kids along and everything like that. But like he made the decision to go and take that journey with blind faith and hoping that everything was going to go well. That I think I embraced that moment too. I was just like, man, let me just do it. What's the harm in me going back to school, shooting my shot, see what happens. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. But I think everything that's happened in the past 6 7 years is meant for me to have this purpose to give back and advocate and let these students know that like you're not alone in this whole situation, and we're there to help you out. Because at the end of the day, another thing I tell students, like, you're going to struggle. You may think that because you got straight A's in high school and you played 4 or 5 different sports and this and that college is going to be perfect for you. You're going to have a moment, right? And that's why we're here to help you out in these moments and make sure that if you fall, we pick you up and we bring you up to the finish line.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because I think for a lot of children of immigrants, the mentality of thinking, well, my parents sacrificed so much for me, you know what I mean, can act as both a burden and sometimes a motivator. You know what I mean? For a lot of us, when I was in college too, and I was failing and doing really bad, my mentality was, how bad can this be if my parents sacrifice everything to come here for me? You know what I mean? I remember when I was a kid and we were in Rhode Island. My mom worked at a jewelry factory making jewelry, and she'd bring a machine home and make jewelry at home at night while she wasn't working to make extra money because they got paid by piece. So the more boxes they completed, the more they got paid. They didn't get paid per hour. So the harder they worked, the more they made, the more money they did. So she'd come home and do extra. And me and my sister were popping little earrings on those little plasticky thingies that
Yeah.
hang on and the thing, at like, 5, 6 years old, help my mom make all these jewelries that get sent out to these stores. And I think about stuff like that too. When I was struggling, I'm like, if my mom and my dad were willing to work and do all this extra stuff, we can do that. But sometimes it does add an extra burden as well, where you're like, I think initially for me, it was a burden, but eventually it became my motivator. You know what I mean? It was me feeling I'm going to let them down because of all they sacrifice, to being, okay, everything they sacrifice means I can do it too, and, improve and stuff. And so, I totally get it, man. And it's kind of real interesting the way you put it. And like, it's nice now that you are able to take that knowledge that you have and that experience that you have and place it into your job and your career, and are able to give back to the school. So when we talk about the school and we talk about diversity and inclusion within a university, every college does things differently, and we already know for the most part, a lot of colleges, uh, Black, Latinos, and other people of color, make up really small percentage of an overall university. Almost everywhere, I think there's very few schools where minorities make up things outside of historically Black universities, and some of the for Latinos. I remember when I was a counselor for Brown, it was like Central University, Central Florida University. That was like 50% Latino, and I was like, whoa, that's crazy to think about that in that type of environment. So what kind of stuff do you notice now when you have your students and the people coming in that you one that you're able to identify now and say, yeah, I remember going through that and this is what I think we could do to improve it? Or what are some of the things that you notice now when you're with your students that you're like, we're still lacking?
Um, I think one thing like from the automatic I see with some of my students, and I go back really into my times at UMass, um, was that I had my white friends, I had my Hispanic friends, but then I wasn't Hispanic enough. I wasn't too white enough. So I was like in the middle, right? And then I had to like figure out how to, and I think that's where I never knew the term at that point, but like that's when I had to learn how to code switch. I'll be
Hmm.
like, okay, like how can I be more this and that? And how can I be more that and that? So I can feel like I'm being embraced for who I am, right? And I see that a lot with some of my students I do work with, especially, some of that, it's a predominantly white institution, right? And walking in there where, they went to high school with mostly white peers, right? And they're coming in and they're trying to find their way there. And sometimes they don't get the automatic embrace where their default is like, all right, let me go hang out with people that look like me, right? Um, and then that's like an obstacle too, right? Because they're just like, oh, like, what are you really trying to do? Are you really one of us or not, right? And you know, we're kids, when you're younger, there's like that idea of like, are you part of the crew or not? And you see that, right? And you see, and there's one particular student that I talk to a lot of the times, and I think what I learned was that you just got to be authentic to yourself. I think the moment you try to start code switching at an early age, although it's a interesting skill to have, right? I'll say it for itself because you learn how to navigate the room and certain things that you're in. But if you can't be authentic to yourself and you can't be true to yourself, then yeah, you're gonna go down the slippery slope of like, who am I really, right? Um, because when you go back and forth and you try to please people, um, to try to make them like you, but at the end of the day, like you gotta like yourself. You gotta like who you are. And if people don't like you and your personality, then why bother, right? And but at the same time, I understand being young, it was really like I want everyone to like me. You know what I mean? When I see that with some of my students, I think it's just like you just got to be authentic to yourself. And I know you're gonna struggle for the next few years trying to figure out what that looks like and how you're gonna deal with it. But the moment you are okay with who you are and what you're about, your values, you embrace your identities, um, everything becomes easier. You become at more peace with your minds. Um, and I say that so easily, but I know like even to this day, I still try to. I go through my own situation where like trying to find that peace and trying to find my authenticity. Right. I think for the most part, I would say at 90% I know who I am, and when I walk into a room, people know who I am. But there's that 10%, right? There's that 10, 5% that is in your back of your mind of like, and I think I'll speak for myself, just like, damn, and like am I not being too Colombian enough? Am I disregarding my roots, or am I not like being for the people or everything like that? Or vice versa with, depending on my identities, right? Yeah, sometimes it creeps up, right? But I think it's just always reverting back to like who you are as an individual and what your values are. Um, I think when it comes to like things that we can still progress on, I think it's just providing the spaces, for our BIPOC students, or first generation international immigrant students, is just figuring out the spaces for them to really be themselves, but also having the right people to develop them. Right. I think this generation is very savvy, and they have the internet at the tip of their fingers, and they could really learn all that stuff, through YouTube, TikTok, whatever the situation is, and they can learn. But I think at the end of the day, it's having that human interaction, having those experiences said to them, um, right? Because there's one thing of like, there's one thing about reading a book, but it's actually living what you read, is two different things, right? And I think it's whatever you can watch or whatever you can read is one thing, but if you can sit down with someone and have a chat and talk about their experiences, it's a different opportunity. It's a different, um, realm, and you just cultivate a different mindset with students, and whatnot. So it's really cultivating that space, and it's really also getting all the faculty and staff that have those identities to come and help out. And I know at our school we have a lot of those individuals seeking to help out. And I think it's our obligation to give back, right? It's our obligation to the mold the next generation that we have for all individuals, period, right? Obviously, everyone has their bias. They're trying to help out, people that look like them or have shared experiences and everything like that, to help them out through their journey, right? But so I think it's just still creating more of those spaces and to help develop them in all those different components.
And it's, development is great, and I think that's one of the big things you touched on early on as well with your job, is that you help develop these students to not just develop as a person, but also be able to develop them to be able to to interact with these different diversities. Because when they go into work, I think when a lot of us, we go into college, and when we grow up, we grow up in an environment that's comfortable to us most of the time. If we went to school that's predominantly Black or Latino, or and we go to college and we stick to that type of people. We go back to the people we're comfortable with. We might stick with more of the people we grew up with, and then when we go, because we need to feel comfortable in college, and when we don't feel comfortable, we don't succeed as well in there as well, and it makes it harder for us, because not only are we dealing with the stress from college, but we're now dealing with not feeling comfortable as well. So it adds twofolds to the challenges in there. But at some point, you need to start commingling. You need to start getting in there and dealing with other people. Because when you go to work, you're going to deal with the same thing, except there aren't going to be organizations at work that are specifically, oh, this is the Latino club of your job. That doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And some of the more forward-thinking companies are starting to having, are very big on the diversity and inclusive, and they do stuff like my company does, things like that as well. But not every job does that. You know what I mean? My last job before this, everybody I work with, or the majority of them, were British. And so, I really, not only was it a colored thing, but it was also, um, the country thing. Where I'm an American, and most of my coworkers were British. So, you talk about that development. What type of things do you guys do for your students to help them develop and prepare themselves to get into the real world?
Yeah. So what I try to do, and I'm laugh because I'm thinking about, like, did they ever ask you about if you watch soccer and what's your favorite soccer team?
Yeah. And they
You
asked
probably
me. They also asked me about what do I think about the royal family and all this
oh, the one.
stuff. And I was there when the Queen died, and I was like, they took off time of work and closed everything, and I was just like, yeah, I just don't get it. It's not myself. But yeah, it's like a whole new different level. So
Yeah, you probably have like a favorite English Premier team now that you probably follow now. Wake up every
uh,
Sunday.
yeah, it's only
Um,
whatever the one is from Ted Lasso. So whatever.
oh, AFC Richmond. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fantastic. So yeah, so going back on the question, I think for what we do, so one of my first initiatives when I started working at Merrimack, as a coordinator, was developing a diversity awareness badge, right? And it was just a workshop. It was like a 3-day workshop because I was trying to, like, give time to people to really develop, right? And it's really just on fundamental basis of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Going from, like, learning about your identities, how they intersect, what are some identities that are privileged, so what are the ones that are oppressed, how can you use certain identities to kind of move the environment that you're in, the spaces to help other people out, or for you to kind of learn and develop more. And then going into the other different things like implicit bias, microaggressions, power and privilege, like understanding the types of power for you to move the masses, make some change, right? And the goal behind it was, like I said, having development, but also understanding, like, you have the power to make change, right? But also, I think for me, and kind of what you were just pointing at, was that my job is to make sure that people get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right? My goal is to push you to your limits, to make you think about these situations, right? What do I do if I see a coworker that's being harassed, or, what is my obligation as an individual, right? What if I see, a microaggression occurring? How do I take it, right? As an individual, do I go off and start yelling at my coworker? Do I learn how to navigate through the politics in the workspace? All these conversations happen within this training. I do have other trainings that I do specifically cater to different offices and different student employees that we do have, depending on what they do. That can go from, like, inclusive language, especially when we're talking with orientation, right? Making sure that, like, when you're being hospitable, that you're saying your name clearly, you're using your pronouns, you talk about your identities comfortably and everything like that, respecting one another on that forefront, and things like that. To diving a little bit deeper in terms of like the power and privilege component. I know I use that same program to do something at a high school in Lawrence, Central Catholic, my alma mater, right? And it was called Be the Cause. And that was the same notion, right? But it was really focused on like defining your A, right? Do you want to be an ally? Do you want to be an activist? Do you want to be an advocate? You know what I mean? How do I show appreciation to others? Because I think that one of the things that when we talk about DEI is that we don't get into the path of showing grace to people, right? I think when someone messes up, we go full attack mode. Let's cancel this person, everything like that. But I think that sometimes like there's some people that just generally have never been open to those ideas because they've been in, certain environments where like maybe all their friends are white or all my friends are men or female or this and that. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it does come a place where it comes from a place where like I just genuinely didn't know and like please help me and teach me, right? Don't get me wrong, are there certain situations where it's just like, all right, you're being a complete ass? Right. Yes. I think we can dictate based on body language and how the tone of voice is, but I think it's making people realize that, we all have a shared experience, right? And sometimes when I do these trainings, I start very vague, right? From being like, hey, well, what's your favorite TV show? All right, bro, you and I like Ted Lasso. Okay. What else do you like about that show? Oh, I like when they talked about mental health. Cool. Do you deal with mental health? I do too. How do you deal with that? You know what I mean? Or like, you know, I love that show by the way.
Yeah, it's a
It's
great
golden
show.
for like good
It's
leadership and all that stuff, right?
and it's just so damn charming. You can't hate it. It's like it's not the funniest show in the world, but you start watching and just like, oh, it's a great show. It's like you just can't.
All right, so you kind of go vague and you dive deeper into it, right? And
Mhm.
have these conversations, and like then you have the moment like, oh wow, like I never thought you and I have something in common, but we do. But it's deeper than that, right? And I'm not going to say that you're going to have those deep relationships with every single person, but I think it's understanding that you got to show some grace, some compassion, patience with everyone, and try to make sure that you support them in their journey to being educated, also. But also know your boundaries too, right? Respect yourself too in terms of like you don't need to be the spokesperson for all Latinos out there or black or whatever ethnicity or gender or anything like that. You don't have to be the but you can probably guide them in the right direction, right? You can provide them the resources and everything like that. Because I think the more we're on the same boat with everything, the better that we're going to go into this journey and go further with everything.
And it's interesting you pointed out the fact that for a lot of people, the lack of understanding isn't on purpose. It's just the consequences of how they grew up. They might have only had one black friend or one white friend. And for a lot of people, in that scenario where they grew up, surrounded by like all white people and they don't know how to deal or act around people of color. And then you have the flip side where you might have that one black kid at that white school who doesn't know how to act and they have to figure out their identity at that point. And a lot of times you'll see it with a lot of us and we'll mention it was like, oh yeah, that guy he grew up with all white kids. You know what I mean? In Texas, we'd see a lot of Mexicans that you wouldn't know they were Mexicans because they like fifth generation, they grew up with all white friends, they don't speak Spanish, and the identity, shifted for them to be more to what they're surrounded with. And for a lot of us, and for a lot of them, they don't understand what this identity crisis is for us and how it affects us. So it's wonderful to see that you guys are able to pick up on that in school, because college is generally for a lot of us one of the first times we uh, deal with this majorly, and so it's really cool to see when you're looking at how you're dealing with stuff now and how you're dealing with your students now and the stuff that you guide them and you tell them and develop them. What is something that you kind of wish you would have been able to tell yourself before?
Man, if I were to talk to 18-year-old me, 19, 20-year-old me, I think, yeah, there's so many things I would have said in all honesty, but I think it's just like, take the advice, no matter if they look like me or didn't grow up in the same environment as me. Um, just take the advice. I think I probably would have been in a better mental state, right? But I know why I did it. I didn't want to disappoint. I didn't want to um, not disappoint myself, but also my family too, right? College is a big thing. I think my parents push education as the thing, right? Knowledge is power, uh, on that cliche of a saying, right? And I didn't want to disappoint that. So I think if I would have showed grace to myself, right, and try to understand, like having those conversations with my parents and let them know that, like, I'm just gonna take a break. You know what I mean? I'm gonna finish what I gotta finish, but I need to just focus on myself for a bit. But also, when I say that, with the grace part is letting myself know, like, it's okay to do that, right? I don't have to follow this societal. I got to finish by 21, 22. I got to be the all star, whatever, and everything like that. I will say, like, I'm definitely blessed to grow up the way I did, right? Like, I went to public. My mom decided to throw me in the inner city of Lowell to go to public school, right? Most people don't do that. They're like, go to a private school, or like, let me not, if you don't have to be there, whatever. But I went there. I learned what it is to kind of be living in Lowell, and some of my peers going through the stuff that they had to go through. Like, same thing. Their parents are immigrants. Some of them were in gangs. Some of my friends, didn't make it out of middle school and everything like that, or we ended up going our separate ways when I went to a private high school, and I stayed in touch with some of them, and they didn't even make it through high school and everything like that. So, um, I think it's just showing grace to myself and understanding that it's okay, right? And I think that's the one thing that I tell my students now, like, it's all right. I think it's one of those things that it's a hard conversation to have, but in the long run, whether you want to believe me or not, right? It's going to be better for you, right? Because I think if I would have taken that break, I probably would have finished by the time I was like, I don't know, maybe 24, 25. I would have gone back to school right away and everything like that, probably. But, I didn't finish school till like 29, got my master's at 31, so um, it's really that. And I think it's just, you put you self pressure on yourself, um, because you want to live to expectations for yourself, but also the individuals that you kind of want to make sure that you make them proud too. So, and I know that's something that's a deep stigma within our culture, right? And making sure that um, we are successful, right? And I think the other thing too, when I say that, is just like, although comparing my life to my parents is two different things, and possibly is a good motivation. It's different though. You know what I mean? Like, I go through my struggles in a different way. I think about the generation now, like, I don't know how I would have lived as a young student with social media nowadays. You know what I mean? Like, I think I would have fallen into the trap and been like, oh my God, everyone hates me. Like, what am I gonna do? Why don't I have friends and all that other stuff, right? Where I think I probably would have taken a bigger hit mental wise, right?
And you're a father now too, so that's something like, I mean, that's something that goes through my mind as well too. It's like, what am I going to have to deal with my daughter? That's different from what I had to deal with, and how can I tackle those issues with her, So
Yeah, you know what? And like, when I see my students now and like certain things that they do, I'm like, man, I'm not even gonna say I'm old like that, but like, damn, like, I'm old. Like, this is a new generation. Like, their train of thoughts, and yeah, you start thinking about that, and then like, you kind of relate that back to your own parents, and figure out, like, you know what they were thinking, and how they were like, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna make sure that they're successful and everything like that? And I think a lot of the times when individuals, like with family members, parents specifically, in our conversations, the fact that, like, yeah, I'm not gonna fault my parents for anything. You know what I mean? Like, they did the best that they could. They knew what they had to get done, for the betterment of who I was. Same thing with my brothers. Like, I'm not gonna fault them for how they treated me. I think the tools that they had, they thought that was the best tools to have, right? And I think that's a lot of the times where, like, people that go through that struggle sometimes and put that blame upon other people or themselves, is like, understand the tools that they had. You know what I mean? Like, if you're only going to give me a hammer and a screwdriver to build a house, like, this, I'm going to try to build you the best house that I can, right? But understand, like, these are the tools and resources that I had at the moment, and hopefully that you like this house that I've built for you. But I've given you tools to think about. Hey, get some other tools. There are other ways to build this house. You can be an interior decorator and make it how you want it to be, because I provided you at least a foundation, for your own home. And now it's really up to you to do that. And I think that's where I am now, is just the fact that I have my foundation, right? And my parents, family members, friends, um, have provided the pillars of my home. So now I'm chilling, trying to figure out how I can make this look like a nice house, and I have my new fascination with being a plant dad too, right? So how am I going to make it look nice and everything like that? But in my line of work, I want my students to have that nice house too.
Yeah, wonderful. And I really appreciate you coming here today and taking time to talk to us. And it looks like the work you're doing is wonderful. And I hope you get a lot of success, and I hope a lot of your students benefit from it as well.
Thank you.
And for everyone else, thank you for listening in. I hope you'll continue to join us, and we'll continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.